The most feared man in the city sits alone, reading about his own indictments. Then, two little girls in pink dresses hand him a toy phone. "It's Grandma. Tell her you're coming home for dinner." What starts as a 20-minute lie to help strangers becomes the family he lost 15 years ago. A ruthless boss, a struggling mother, twin girls who crack his armor. Keep watching to see how this unfolds. Like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. Tell me where you're watching from. The man everyone feared sat alone in silence, scrolling through the news on his phone. No guards, no meetings, no enemies in sight, just another powerful boss pretending he didn't feel lonely. Se-jun hadn't chosen the Grand Meridian Hotel for its famous chandelier or the imported marble floors. He'd chosen it because the lobby tea service had exactly 4 tables, and on Tuesday afternoons, 3 of them stayed empty. Empty meant safe. Empty meant predictable. Empty meant he could read about his own indictments without someone recognizing his face and calling the authorities. The newspaper spread before him carried his photograph on page 3. Kingpin faces federal charges. The headline writers always loved that word. Kingpin. As if running an empire of fear and money was something regal. As if the leather chair in his penthouse office didn't feel like a throne made of ice. He'd stopped tasting his coffee years ago. It was always the same temperature, the same blend, served in the same bone china cup. Routine was armor. Routine kept the ghosts quiet. That's when he saw them. 2 identical girls in matching pink dresses, moving through the opulent lobby like butterflies that had wandered into a mausoleum. They couldn't have been older than 6. Their hair was styled in identical puffballs, secured with satin ribbons that matched their dresses perfectly. They moved with the kind of confidence that only children possess, the kind that hasn't yet learned that marble floors and crystal chandeliers mean don't touch, don't run, don't exist here unless you're rich. Se-jun's instinct was to look away. Children were complications. Children asked questions. Children noticed things that adults had trained themselves to ignore. But these 2 weren't noticing him. They were running. More specifically, they were running from the woman in the bird nest hat, the hotel's guest services manager whose smile was reserved exclusively for platinum credit cards and foreign dignitaries. Right now, that smile was nowhere in sight. Her face had arranged itself into the expression of someone who'd discovered gum on expensive upholstery. The girls spotted Se-jun's table and made a split-second decision that would change everything. They ran straight toward the most dangerous man in the city, clutching something pink and plastic between them. Se-jun's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed weapon at his ankle. Then he saw what they were holding. A toy phone. Bright pink, with oversized buttons and a small yellow screen showing a cartoon grandmother's face. The first girl reached him, breathless and urgent. "Mister, you have to talk to Grandma right now." The second girl thrust the toy phone directly at his hand, her eyes wide with the kind of desperate seriousness that children deploy when the entire world hangs in the balance of pretend. "Tell her you're coming home for dinner. It's really, really important." Se-jun stared at the pink rectangle being pressed into his palm. In his other hand, his real phone displayed a Reuters alert about a federal task force assembling evidence for his prosecution. Men with badges and subpoenas were hunting him across 3 countries, and 2 little girls in pink dresses wanted him to talk to a plastic grandmother. Behind them, the bird nest hat was closing in, heels clicking against marble like a countdown timer. "Girls, I have warned you twice already. Unaccompanied minors are not permitted in the lobby tea service. I will have to call." "Papa's right here," the first girl announced, grabbing Se-jun's sleeve with tiny, determined fingers. The second girl nodded with theatrical relief. "We told you we weren't alone. Papa was just making a business call." Papa. The word hit Se-jun like a bullet he hadn't seen coming. The hotel manager stopped 3 feet from his table, her expression shifting through several emotions at once. Recognition flickered in her eyes, not of his face, but of the tailored suit that cost more than her monthly salary, the watch that could buy a small car, the posture of a man who'd never asked permission for anything in his life. Se-jun looked at the toy phone in his hand, looked at the 2 pairs of eyes watching him with desperate hope, looked at the woman whose entire job was removing inconvenient problems from luxury spaces. He could end this with one word: deny them. Return to his cooling coffee and his comfortable isolation. Instead, Se-jun, the man who'd ordered executions with less hesitation than most people order lunch, lifted the pink plastic phone to his ear. "Hello, Grandma," he said, his voice carrying the same cold authority he used in boardrooms where men's fates were decided. "Yes, I'm bringing the girls home for dinner." The toy phone made a cheerful beeping sound. Both girls released simultaneous breaths of relief. And somewhere in the dangerous machinery of Se-jun's chest, something long dormant shifted in the darkness. The hotel manager's smile returned, brittle and uncertain. "I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Kim," Se-jun lied smoothly, using the most common surname in Korea. "And my daughters were just bringing me a message from their grandmother. We'll be leaving shortly. Of course, please enjoy your tea." The woman in the bird nest hat retreated, her heels clicking a much quieter rhythm. The girls remained frozen, staring at him with identical expressions of wonder and relief. Se-jun set down the toy phone. "You have 20 minutes before I finish this coffee," he told them quietly. "Whatever you're hiding from, make it count." The first girl, he could see a small Clara embroidered on her dress collar, grinned. "We're not hiding, we're just waiting for Mama. She's at a job interview upstairs, and the mean lady said we couldn't wait in the lobby, but we can't go outside alone, and—" "Clara, don't tell the strange man our whole life," the second girl, Clementine, interrupted, though she was already pulling out the chair beside him and climbing up with the determination of someone claiming territory. Clara followed suit, settling into the chair on his other side. Se-jun found himself flanked by pink dresses and Gap's-toothed smiles, two small tornadoes that had blown through his carefully constructed solitude and decided to stay. "Your coffee's gone cold," Clara observed, peering into his cup with scientific interest. "Mama says cold coffee is sad. Do you want us to order you a new one?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine," Clementine said with the brutal honesty of the very young. "You look like how Mama looks when she's reading the bills, all tight, like this." She scrunched up her face in an exaggerated frown. Se-jun realized with something approaching alarm that he was being analyzed by a 6-year-old. "Your phone is sad too," Clara added, pointing at the newspaper still spread across his table. "Why are you reading about bad guys?" The man everyone feared looked down at his own photograph on page 3, then at the two small faces watching him with open curiosity. "Research," he said. 20 minutes, he'd promised himself. He could endure 20 minutes of chaos. It was a tactical decision, nothing more. He'd scared away the hotel official, and now he'd wait out the clock until their mother collected them, and he could return to his careful, cold existence. But when Clementine reached across the table and very seriously offered him half of a slightly melted chocolate she'd been saving in her pocket, Se-jun felt the first crack in the armor he'd been building for 15 years. "Thank you for being our papa," she whispered, as if sharing a tremendous secret. "Even if it's just pretend." Se-jun stared at the chocolate melting in his palm, at the pink toy phone still sitting on his table beside the news of his indictments, at the two little girls who'd chosen the most dangerous man in the city to be their father for 20 minutes. "Just pretend," he agreed quietly. But somewhere in the cold country of his chest, something warm and long forgotten was beginning to wake up, and it terrified him more than any federal task force ever could. 15 minutes into the arrangement, Se-jun learned that Clara could recite the entire periodic table, but couldn't tie her shoes, and that Clementine had opinions about his tie that she wasn't shy about sharing. "It's too plain," she informed him, tugging gently at the silk. "Papa should wear colors, like Mama's interview blazer. It's orange and it makes people remember her." Se-jun doubted anyone who met him needed help with remembering. "Girls, there you are." The voice cut through the lobby's carefully maintained quietness. Se-jun looked up to see a woman in an orange blazer moving toward them, with the controlled panic of someone trying not to run in a place where running was forbidden. Her heels were slightly scuffed. Her portfolio was clutched against her chest like a shield, and her face carried the exhausted determination of someone who'd been fighting the world for so long that fighting had become her normal expression. This was Ivy, Clara and Clementine launched themselves at their mother with the force of small missiles, both talking at once about the mean lady and the nice man in Grandma's phone call. Ivy's eyes found Se-jun over their heads, and he watched her expressions cycle through confusion, concern, and then something that looked like mortification as she pieced together what had happened. "I am so sorry," she said, extracting herself from the girls and approaching his table. "They weren't supposed to leave the waiting area. I told them to stay put for 20 minutes while I—" She stopped, seeing the newspaper, seeing his face, seeing, perhaps, that she was apologizing to someone who didn't match the usual profile of people who tolerated uninvited children at their breakfast table. They were perfectly safe, Se-jun said, which was technically true, though he suspected she wouldn't find much comfort in knowing her daughters had chosen a crime lord as their temporary guardian. Still, Ivy's hand moved to Clara's shoulder, pulling both girls closer. Protective. "Thank you for whatever this was. We'll get out of your way." The bird nest hat was watching from across the lobby, her expression suggesting that she was waiting for exactly this moment to pounce. Se-jun made a decision that would cost him far more than 20 minutes. He stood, collecting his newspaper with deliberate slowness. When he spoke, his voice carried across the marble floors with the kind of authority that made security guards straighten and managers reconsider their priorities. "My daughters and I were just finishing our tea. My wife was delayed with business." He turned to Ivy, his expression neutral, but his eyes holding a very clear message. "Play along. Shall we go, darling?" Ivy's shock lasted exactly 3 seconds before survival instinct took over. She'd been playing roles her entire life. Confident applicant, capable single mother, woman who definitely had her rent figured out. Adding "wife of intimidating stranger" to the repertoire was just another performance. "Of course," she said smoothly, though her hand tightened on Clara's shoulder. "The girls were excited to see you." They walked out together, a strange portrait of a family that didn't exist. Se-jun moved through the lobby like he owned it, which, given his net worth, he probably could. The bird nest hat watched them leave with an expression of deep suspicion that she couldn't quite justify acting on. The revolving door spat them into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright, too real. "Okay," Ivy said the moment they were clear of the entrance. She positioned herself between Se-jun and the girls with the instinct of someone who'd learned to be a shield. "I don't know what game this is, but thank you for the assist and we'll be going now." "Mama, he saved us from the mean lady," Clementine protested. "And I appreciate that. Very much. But we don't take rides from strangers, and we definitely don't." "Have lunch with them?" Se-jun interrupted. He wasn't sure why he was still talking. The tactical decision had been made. He'd help them escape. His 20 minutes were up. He should walk away, return to his expensive isolation, forget that 2 small girls in pink dresses had called him Papa. But Ivy was still standing like a barricade, and behind her, Clara was looking at him with something that might have been disappointment, and Se-jun realized he didn't want to be forgotten quite yet. "There's a cafe 2 blocks from here," he continued. "They have a children's menu with pictures. My treat for the inconvenience of borrowing your family." Ivy's eyes narrowed. She was calculating, he could see it. Weighing the strangeness of the offer against whatever circumstances had brought her to a hotel interview with 2 6-year-olds in tow. "One lunch," she said finally. "Public place, and then we part ways like sensible strangers." Agreed. What Se-jun didn't say was that he'd stopped being sensible the moment he'd answered a plastic pink phone. What Ivy didn't say was that she'd noticed his watch cost more than her annual income, and that kind of wealth didn't usually buy lunch for struggling strangers without wanting something in return. But the girls were already chattering about pancakes, and sometimes survival meant accepting kindness, even when you couldn't see the price tag yet. The cafe had checked tablecloths and a menu that featured dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. Se-jun had never been anywhere like it. His world was divided between boardrooms with imported leather and restaurants where the waiters remembered his Scotch preference. Places with crayons on the table were foreign territory. Clara and Clementine attacked their pancakes with the enthusiasm of soldiers who'd won a battle. Ivy ate her soup slowly, her eyes never quite leaving Se-jun's face. She was still trying to figure out what he wanted, and he couldn't blame her. In his experience, nothing was ever really free. So, Ivy said, setting down her spoon with deliberate care, "You're either extremely kind or extremely bored. Which is it?" Se-jun considered his answer. The truth was too complicated, that he'd seen himself reflected in the desperate way she'd pulled her daughters close, that the empty chair across from him at breakfast had felt less empty with 3 people filling the space, that for 45 minutes he'd remembered what it felt like to be part of something louder than silence. "Maybe both," he said instead. Ivy laughed, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, thank you for both then. We should probably get going. Grandma's expecting us, and rush hour traffic is—" "I run a consulting firm." The lie came easily. Se-jun had been lying about what he did for so long that the cover story felt more real than the truth. "We help businesses optimize their operations. I'm always looking for talented people." He pulled a business card from his wallet. It was real enough, technically. The company existed, provided legitimate services, and occasionally even made money through legal means. What it primarily did was launder his other income, but Ivy didn't need those details. "If you're looking for work," he continued, sliding the card across the table, "call this number. We're hiring." Ivy picked up the card like it might explode. "I just bombed an interview for an assistant position at a law firm. What makes you think I'm qualified to consult for businesses? You kept 2 6-year-olds entertained in a hotel lobby for an hour without them destroying anything. You negotiated a stranger into buying you lunch. You're more qualified than half the people I've hired." It wasn't entirely a lie. The ability to think quickly under pressure was exactly the kind of skill his organization valued, though usually in different contexts. Ivy tucked the card into her portfolio, her expression carefully neutral. "I'll think about it. Do that." They parted in the parking lot, Ivy herding the girls toward a bus stop while Se-jun walked to where his driver waited with the car. He told himself it was a charitable gesture, nothing more, that he'd forget about them by tomorrow. But that night, alone in his penthouse, Se-jun found himself hoping his phone would ring. The call came 3 days later. Se-jun was in a meeting about shipping routes that technically didn't involve anything illegal, though the profit margins suggested otherwise. When his phone lit up with an unknown number, he excused himself with a kind of authority that made grown men stop talking mid-sentence. "This is Se-jun. Hi, this is Ivy. From the hotel? You gave me your card, and I know this is probably weird, but Clara has been asking about you nonstop, and there's this thing at the aquarium on Saturday, and I thought maybe—" She was nervous. He could hear it in the way her words tumbled over each other, like she'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times and was now failing to execute it smoothly. "What time?" he asked. The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. "Really? I mean, you don't have to. I know you're probably busy with important—" "What time, Ivy?" 10, the main entrance. "But seriously, if you can't make it, I'll be there." Saturday morning found Se-jun standing outside the aquarium in jeans and a jacket that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, but was technically casual. He felt ridiculous. He looked like a man trying to disguise himself as someone who did normal weekend activities, which was essentially accurate. Clara and Clementine spotted him first, their shrieks of "Papa!" echoing across the entrance plaza with enough volume to make several families turn and stare. They crashed into his legs with the force of small comets, and Se-jun found himself automatically reaching down to steady them, his hands landing on identical pink backpacks. "You came," Clara breathed, looking up at him with an expression of pure joy that made something in his chest hurt. "I said I would." "Grown-ups say lots of things," Clementine informed him wisely. "Mama says we can't count on promises, only patterns." Se-jun looked over their heads to where Ivy stood, apology already forming on her face. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that had seen better days, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked nothing like the polished women who occasionally decorated his arm at business functions, and somehow that made her more real, more dangerous to the careful walls he'd built. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "They've been talking about you all week. Fair warning, they're convinced you're secretly a superhero. I'm not. I know. But maybe for today, you could just be a guy who likes fish. Se-jun had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, stared down federal prosecutors, and ordered things he didn't like to think about. But the simple request to pretend to be normal felt like the hardest assignment he'd ever accepted. I can try. For 3 weeks, Se-jun learned what normal looked like. Saturday aquarium visits became Saturday park visits, then Saturday ice cream trips. He was terrible at it. He didn't know the names of cartoon characters. He bought the girls educational toys when they wanted stuffed animals. He once tried to help with homework and ended up explaining corporate tax structures to a 6-year-old. But he showed up every single time. The call came on a Thursday, in the middle of a negotiation over shipping container contents that would never pass customs inspection. Se-jun's phone lit up with Ivy's number, and he answered it without excusing himself from the table, which his associates knew meant something serious. Se-jun, her voice was tight, controlled panic barely held in check. I know you're working, but Clara fell at school and they think her arm might be broken, and Grandma's at a doctor's appointment, and I can't leave my shift for another hour, and which hospital? Mercy General. But you don't have to. I'm already moving. He was. He'd stood the moment he heard Clara and broken, his chair scraping against expensive hardwood. The men at the table stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to calculation. Gentlemen, we'll have to continue this discussion later. My daughter has broken her arm. The lie came out so naturally that he didn't catch it until he was already in the elevator. My daughter. Not a friend's child or a family emergency. My daughter. His driver broke every traffic law between the docks and Mercy General. Se-jun didn't tell him to slow down. He found Clara in the pediatric emergency room, sitting on a paper-covered bed with her arm cradled against her chest. Clementine sat beside her, holding her sister's good hand. A nurse was trying to explain X-ray procedures in a cheerful voice that Clara was clearly not appreciating. Papa? Both girls' faces transformed when they saw him. Clara burst into tears she'd apparently been holding back, and Clementine launched herself at him with enough force that he had to catch her or get knocked backward. You came, Clara sobbed. I told them you would come, but the nurse said most fathers don't, and I said you're not most fathers. Se-jun crossed to the bed and very carefully, very gently, brushed the tears from her face. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Tell me what hurts. The nurse cleared her throat. Are you the father? We'll need to verify. I'm the father, Se-jun said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Whatever she needs, make it happen. Ivy arrived 40 minutes later, bursting through the emergency room doors like a woman who'd run the entire way. Her work uniform was disheveled, her name tag crooked, and her eyes were wild with the kind of fear that only parents understand. She found them in the casting room. Clara was getting a bright pink cast, chattering about how it matched her favorite dress. Clementine was sitting in Se-jun's lap, having claimed that position an hour ago and refused to vacate it. Se-jun had one arm around her, while his other hand held Clara's good one, and he looked so natural in the configuration that for a moment, Ivy just stared. Mama, Clara's face lit up. Look, Papa stayed the whole time. He didn't leave even when I cried during the X-ray. Ivy's eyes found Se-jun's over the girls' heads. Thank you, she said, and the weight of those 2 words carried everything she couldn't say in front of witnesses. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being what they needed when I couldn't be there. It wasn't a problem. They walked out together once the paperwork was finished, Clara proudly displaying her new cast to anyone who would look. In the parking lot, Ivy finally stopped pretending everything was fine. The nurse said you told them you were the father. Se-jun had been expecting this. He'd prepared several reasonable explanations during the 40 minutes of waiting. Medical decisions required parental authority. It was simpler than explaining the actual situation. The hospital had protocols. What came out instead was the truth. In that moment, I was. Ivy stared at him. The girls were occupied examining a bird's nest in a nearby tree, giving them a bubble of privacy that felt dangerously honest. Se-jun, what are we doing here, really? He could have deflected. could have made it about charity or boredom or any of the dozen excuses he'd been telling himself for weeks. Instead, he looked at this woman in her wrinkled work uniform, with her fierce eyes and her exhausted shoulders, and told her something true. I had a family once, a sister. She was 8 when she died. Car accident 15 years ago. My parents followed a year later. Grief, the doctors said, but I know better. They died because their world ended, and they didn't know how to live in the ruins. Ivy's expression softened into something that looked like understanding, or maybe just recognition of shared pain. I've been living in those ruins ever since, Se-jun continued quietly. And then 2 little girls handed me a pink phone and asked me to come home for dinner. And for the first time in 15 years, I wanted to say yes. The invitation came that same evening, delivered by Clementine via a phone call that started with, "Grandma says you have to come to dinner tomorrow or she'll come find you herself." Se-jun had faced down armed rivals, federal investigators, and hostile takeovers. The prospect of meeting Grandma Neka terrified him more than all of them combined. The apartment was in a building that had seen better decades. The elevator groaned its way to the 4th floor, and Se-jun found himself standing in a narrow hallway that smelled like someone was cooking something that involved a lot of spices and even more love. He knocked. The door opened to reveal a woman who couldn't have been taller than 5'2", but somehow managed to look down at him anyway. Neka wore a dress in bold geometric patterns, her silver hair wrapped in a matching headscarf, and her eyes held the kind of wisdom that came from surviving things most people only read about. "So," she said, looking him up and down with the thoroughness of a general inspecting troops, "you're the man who's been playing house with my family." "Grandma," Ivy's voice came from somewhere inside. "We talked about this. Be nice." "I'm always nice. I'm also always honest. The two aren't mutually exclusive." Neka stepped up aside. "Come in, Mr. Kim, who isn't really named Kim. Let's see if you're worth the trouble my granddaughter's been putting into her hair lately." The apartment was small but immaculate, every surface covered with photographs and children's drawings. The dining table was set for 5, and Se-jun realized with a start that they'd made space for him, not as a guest, but as part of the count. Dinner was loud. The girls talked over each other. Ivy refereed with practiced ease, and Neka asked questions that weren't really questions so much as polite interrogations. What did he do for work? Where was his family? What were his intentions? Se-jun, who'd built an empire on deception, found himself telling more truth than he'd spoken in years. Edited truth, certainly. He left out the parts about federal indictments and shipping containers full of contraband. But the loneliness, the grief, the way her granddaughters had cracked open something he'd thought was permanently sealed, all of that was real. "You're in love with my daughter," Neka said suddenly, passing him the rice. Se-jun nearly dropped the bowl. Across the table, Ivy went very still. That's not, we're just, young man, I've been watching people lie for 73 years. You're not even good at it." Neka smiled, and it was terrifying and warm at the same time. "The question isn't whether you love her. The question is whether you're brave enough to do something about it." Se-jun left that dinner and didn't come back for 3 days. Not because he didn't want to, but because he wanted to so badly it terrified him. He sat in his penthouse office, staring at his phone, trying to remember why solitude had ever felt safe. His world was dangerous. Men like him didn't get happy endings. They got prison sentences or bullets, and anyone standing too close got caught in the crossfire. Ivy and the girls deserved better than collateral damage. On the 3rd day, Clara called him. Not Ivy, Clara. She must have stolen her mother's phone. "Papa, why are you hiding?" Se-jun had no idea how to answer that. "I'm not hiding. I'm working." That's what grown-ups say when they're hiding. Mama does it too. She works extra shifts when she's sad about the bills, and Grandma pretends to organize closets when she misses Grandpa. Clara's voice was matter-of-fact, the way children were when they saw through all the careful lies adults told themselves. "Are you sad about something?" "Yes." "Is it us? Did we do something wrong?" The question hit him like a physical blow. "No, never. You did everything right. I'm the problem, Clara. I'm not." He stopped, unsure how to explain to a 6-year-old that he was a monster trying to pretend to be a man. Mama says the best people are the ones who think they're not good enough, because they keep trying to be better. Clara paused. Are you trying to be better, Papa? Se-jun looked around his office, the leather chairs, the imported art, the view of a city he'd spent 15 years conquering. It was all so quiet, so perfectly, absolutely empty. I want to be, he said quietly. Then come home. We're having spaghetti and Clementine learned a new song on the piano and Mama made cookies, but they're a little burned because she was distracted, and Grandma says the only thing missing is you. Home. She said it like it was simple. Like home wasn't a luxury hotel tea service or a penthouse with a view, but a cramped apartment with burned cookies and off-key piano practice. I'll be there in 20 minutes. You always say 20 minutes, Clara observed, and I've never missed one yet. This time, when Se-jun walked out of his office, he didn't tell his assistant when he'd be back. He didn't take the files he'd planned to review. He just left, walking away from the empire he'd built toward a fourth-floor apartment that smelled like burned cookies and sounded like family. When Ivy opened the door, her eyes were red like maybe she'd been crying, but her smile was real. You came back. I'll always come back, Se-jun said and meant it. 5 years later, Se-jun sat in the Grand Meridian Hotel reading the newspaper. Same lobby, same table, same bone china cup. But everything else had changed. The headlines no longer featured his photograph. He'd made careful, calculated moves to step back from the empire he'd built, transferring power to people who didn't have ghosts chasing them. It had taken 3 years of delicate negotiations and 2 years of quietly erasing his name from documents that could end badly. He wasn't clean. Men like him never fully were. But he was clean enough to sleep at night with Ivy beside him. Papa, you're doing the brooding thing again. Se-jun looked up to find Clara and Clementine, now 11, standing beside his table in matching dresses that were no longer pink, but a sophisticated navy blue. They'd grown tall, lost the gaps in their teeth, and developed personalities distinct enough that strangers could finally tell them apart. Clara was all sharp edges and science textbooks. Clementine was art and music and questions about philosophy that Se-jun had no business trying to answer. I'm not brooding, I'm reading. You're staring at the same page you were staring at 10 minutes ago, Clara observed. That's brooding. Where's your mother? Getting ready. Grandma's helping. There's a lot of nervous laughing happening. Clementine grinned. You're really doing this, right? You're not going to panic and run like you did that one time? I came back. After 3 days, Mama cried. Se-jun set down the newspaper. I'm not running, not this time, not ever again. The girls exchanged a look that suggested they were satisfied with this answer, then promptly claimed the chairs on either side of him. Same configuration as 5 years ago, but now they could reach the table without climbing. For the record, Clara said, we knew you'd stay. Even when you disappeared, you kept your pattern. 20 minutes, Clementine added. You always come back in 20 minutes, or 20 days, or 20 months, but you always come back. Ivy appeared then, walking across the marble lobby in a dress the color of sunset. Neka walked beside her, smaller now but no less formidable, carrying a bouquet that matched the autumn flowers arranged throughout the lobby. Se-jun stood, and his hands trembled for the first time since he'd ordered his first shipment of illegal goods 15 years ago. Hi, Ivy said, stopping in front of him. Hi, you look terrified. I am terrified. Good, me too. She smiled. Ready? Se-jun thought about the pink toy phone, the hospital emergency, the burned cookies, the 5 years of learning what family sounded like. He thought about the man he'd been, cold, isolated, convinced he deserved nothing but expensive silence. I've been ready since the moment 2 little girls told me to call their grandmother. The small ceremony happened right there in the tea service area, officiated by a judge who owed Se-jun a favor and witnessed by the twins and Neka and exactly 0 people from his old life. When the judge pronounced them married, Clara and Clementine cheered loud enough that the bird nest hat lady looked over disapprovingly from across the lobby. Se-jun didn't care. He was too busy kissing his wife while his daughters laughed and Grandma Neka dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Later, at the same table where it had all begun, the 5 of them shared tea and small sandwiches. The conversation was loud, chaotic, full of interruptions and laughter, and Clementine stealing food from Clara's plate when she thought no one was looking. "Thank you," Ivy said quietly, her hand finding his under the table. "For what?" "For answering the phone." Se-jun looked around the table, at the girls arguing about whether dinosaurs could have survived the asteroid if they'd been smarter, at Nika adding her own ridiculous theories just to make them laugh, at Ivy with her sunset dress and her smile that made his chest hurt in the best possible way. The man everyone feared had spent 5 years learning that the opposite of loneliness wasn't power or money or control. It was noise, it was chaos. It was a full table and burned cookies and off-key piano practice and being called Papa by two girls who'd given him a pink phone and commanded him to come home. "I'd answer it again," he said, "every single time." And somewhere in the luxury of the Grand Meridian Hotel, in a lobby that had once been a showcase for his isolation, Se-jun finally understood what it meant to belong. The pretend had become permanent. 20 minutes had become forever. And the ghost in the expensive suit had finally come home.